Hello, and welcome to the 23rd episode of LGBTQIA+, Heroes, Icons, Legends, and Events. This series of programs covers a wide variety of topics, such as journalist and author Randy Shilts, activist Cleve Jones and the AIDS Memorial Quilt, and entertainers Freddie Mercury and Sir Elton John. The year 1903 is remembered as the year that the Ford Motor Company sold its first Model A automobile, the year that the Wright brothers made their first successful flight, and the year that Milton Hershey broke ground on his chocolate factory in Pennsylvania. It's also the year that an influential American chef and teacher was born. In today's episode, we'll discuss the life and legacy of the man who was considered to be America's first foodie and whom the New York Times called, quote, the Dean of American Cookery. Today we'll talk about American chef, teacher, TV personality, and cookbook author James Beard. James Andrews Beard was born on May 5, 1903 in Portland, Oregon. His father, Jonathan, was a customs official and a ladies' man and was rarely at home. His mother, Mary Elizabeth, ran the small residential Gladstone Hotel and was a talented cook. The 13.5-pound baby boy was his parents' only child, although his father had a daughter from a previous relationship. At age 42, Mary Elizabeth's motivation for her marriage was to have a child of her own. Mother made all the rules. Only the highest quality foods were allowed in her kitchen. James described his mother as having, quote, an uncanny sense of food and the talent to show others how to prepare it. She loved to cook, eat, and talk food. He also described her as, quote, that incredible woman who was my father. James harbored a distinct memory of his first gastronomic experience. He had crawled into a vegetable bin, and upon finding a large onion, he ate it, skin and all. Onions became one of his lifetime favorite foods and were featured in what would become one of his most famous recipes. James developed a love for food that stayed with him his entire life. He had the special gift of taste memories of his favorite and not-so-favorite foods. James was 3 years old when he was bedridden with malaria. His mother and her Chinese kitchen manager, Juliet, took care of him, and together they prepared a wide variety of cuisines which made a huge impression on the young James. He said that Juliet, his, quote, Chinese godfather, instilled in him a love of Chinese culture. His mother hosted many parties and get-togethers, and James was usually the only child in attendance. His father disliked his mother's friends and was often absent. James was a spoiled child who performed for the partygoers, much as he performed for his friends for the rest of his life. He wrote in his 1964 memoir, Delights and Prejudices, quote, I soon became as precocious and nasty a child as ever inhabited Portland. James knew that he was gay by the time he was 7 years old. He was a large child with a big appetite, big hands, and a big belly. He never lacked for friends, but was often ridiculed for his size, and he was ashamed of his sexual orientation. As he entered his teen years, he weighed over 240 pounds and stood at over 6 feet tall. He had a commanding presence, a wicked sense of humor, and a gift for music and drama. James attended Washington High School and graduated in 1920. He attended Reed College in Portland, expecting to graduate in the class of 1924, but he was expelled after 2 semesters. The reason for his expulsion was not immediately clear. Then it was revealed that James was expelled for alleged homosexual relationships with students and a professor. Any photos and references to him were deleted from the school yearbook just weeks away from its publication. James was devastated by the scandal. He left Portland to spend a few years living and traveling in Europe. He traveled first to Liverpool, England. He lived for a while in London, where he studied voice and acting. He also spent time in Paris, where he studied voice and developed a love of French cooking and culture. James returned to the United States in 1923. He joined a theatrical troupe in New York City and studied voice and acting. In 1924, he returned to Portland, where he joined a community theater group and worked as a radio announcer. He moved to Hollywood, California in 1927 to try to start a career in acting, and eventually he won parts in a handful of silent films. James returned to Portland in 1928 and continued acting in local theater. He studied acting in Seattle and then scenic and costume design at the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After returning to Portland in 1932, James worked in radio and local theater and taught cooking classes. He moved to New York City in 1937 to start a career in theater. His theater career never took off, although he performed in many stage productions. James developed a reputation for being, quote, fabulous at planning parties and organizing the food and drink. The cocktail party craze was in full swing, and the parties served in large part as get-togethers for rich women who were shamed for drinking in public and for affluent gay men who used the parties as a way to meet other gay men and mingle. James met siblings Bill and Irma Rhode at a cocktail party in New York. At first, he was romantically interested in Bill, but they became business partners instead. Together, they started a catering business called Hors d'oeuvre Incorporated. When James started working in the culinary industry, he thought that most hors d'oeuvres served at cocktail parties were bland, uninteresting, and lacking in elegance. To spruce things up, he developed recipes such as stuffed tomatoes and his famous onion sandwiches, which were light and flavorful. A reviewer from the New York Daily News raved about the onion sandwiches, saying, quote, "It is the brioche onion sandwich which gives the palate its great moment." Hors d'oeuvre Incorporated was immediately successful. James later said, quote, "Designing hors d'oeuvre is not different from designing sets and costumes. Food is very much theater." He started teaching cooking classes, and in 1940 he published his first cookbook, Hors d'oeuvre and Canapé, a collection of his catering recipes. The catering business ended once and for all when World War II started. James was drafted into the U.S. Army and was trained as a cryptographic specialist. He had hoped to serve in the hotel division of the Army Quartermaster Corps. He successfully obtained release from the Army in 1943. After the war, James made his television debut on Radio City Matinee with a cooking spot that introduced him to the TV-watching public. He soon became the first person to host a live TV cooking show when Elsie Presents, James Beard and I Love to Eat premiered in August 1946. It was the first national cooking show in television history. The show was sponsored by the Borden Company, the makers of Borden Dairy Products and Elmer's Glue. His famous tagline, quote, "Yes, I love to eat," showed his audience that they could eat well and enjoy it. The show lasted until May 1947 and established James as an American food authority. James also hosted a daily radio program, promoted countless food products, wrote a syndicated newspaper column, and developed menus for New York City restaurants. In 1954, the New York Times called James, quote, "the Dean of American Cookery." He founded the James Beard Cooking School in New York City in 1955. During the 1950s, he made his name as, quote, "James Beard, the brand name, face, and belly of American gastronomy," according to author David Camp. In 1961, Julia Child was on a book tour in the United States for Mastering the Art of French Cooking, the first book she co-wrote with her friend Simone Beck. She was introduced to James in New York City. He hosted a dinner party for her at a restaurant called the Egg Basket, and then the next day he took her to the Four Seasons Hotel for an extravagant food and wine tasting. Julia was becoming well known as an authority on French cooking techniques, while James had already become the authority on American cooking. Together, Julia and James were at the forefront of the farm-to-table movement, insisting on fresh ingredients and simple food preparation. James and Julia became the best of friends, with similar careers. They were very much alike, standing over 6 feet tall, with distinctive voices. They even came up with a pet name to describe their friendship, Gigi, for Julia and Jim. Julia's relationship with James also tempered her outlook on the LGBT community. She was a gay icon who held prejudices against the gay community. Her views changed during her friendship with James and then the advent of the AIDS crisis, when she lost several friends to the disease. They remained close friends until James died in 1985. James published his memoir, Delights and Prejudices, in 1964. The book detailed his early life in Oregon, his world travels, his cooking classes, and his love of cooking and American cuisine. The chapters included his recipes. He taught cooking classes all over the United States. came up with new and different ideas for entertaining. He was the first American cook to master the charcuterie board. In 1970, he said, quote, "I put out a big board of various slicing sausages, salami, Polish sausage, whatever I find in the market that looks good, and an assortment of mustards. I also like to have another board of cheeses, Swiss Gruyere, a fine cheddar, and maybe a brie. And with the cheeses, I serve thinly sliced rye bread and crackers of some kind and a bowl of fruit." James made endorsement deals to promote products he would not have used in his own cooking, such as Omaha steaks, Planters peanut oil, and Adolph's meat tenderizer. He told friends that he felt like a, quote, "gastronomic whore" for doing it, but he needed the money for his cooking schools. On May 16, 1976, James was finally acknowledged by Reed College. He was awarded an honorary degree, and after accepting it, he gave a speech and shared his recipe for brownies. He received a standing ovation. James publicly came out in 1981 when he published a revised version of his memoir, Delights and Prejudices. He said, quote, "By the time I was 7, I knew that I was gay. I think it's time to talk about that now." Also in 1981, he and his friend Gail Green started City Meals on Wheels to feed homebound elderly people in New York City. The organization has served over 50 million meals since its inception. James Beard died of heart failure on January 21, 1985 in New York City. He was 81 years old. He was cremated and his ashes were spread in Oregon on the beaches where he spent summers as a child. In 1986, Julia Child and other chefs bought James Beard's townhouse on West 12th Street in Greenwich Village in New York City. They established the James Beard Foundation, whose mission is, quote, "to provide a center for the culinary arts and to continue to foster the interest James Beard inspired in all aspects of food, its preparation, presentation, and of course, enjoyment." The foundation provides scholarships to aspiring cooking professionals and preserves the culinary traditions that James created. The annual James Beard Foundation Awards are held on the first Monday in May to honor American chefs, journalists, cookbook authors, and restaurant designers. The awards are frequently referred to as the Oscars of the food and restaurant industry. Past winners of the award include chefs Wolfgang Puck, Alice Waters, and Lydia Bastianich. Between 1940 and 1983, James wrote over 30 cookbooks. Most of the cookbooks are still in publication and contain thousands of his original recipes. His culinary legacy lives on. The famous Portland Public Market closed in 1942. In 2010, community members formed the James Beard Public Market nonprofit organization to plan the site and design of a new market. Originally, the new market was set to open in 2018 in downtown Portland, but disputes over the location and its accessibility stalled the project. In 2020, funds allocated for the pre-development and design were redirected for emergency services and pandemic relief. The nonprofit organization is still looking for an appropriate location and funding for the market. To know more about James Beard and his culinary legacy, go to our website, gwinnettpl.org, to check out the following suggested items: 101 Classic Cookbooks, 501 Classic Recipes. Deary, The Remarkable Life of Julia Child by Bob Spitz. The Essential James Beard Cookbook, 450 Recipes That Shaped the Tradition of American Cooking by James Beard. The James Beard Foundation's Best of the Best by Kit Wohl. The Man Who Ate Too Much by John Birdsall. Provence, 1970. MFK Fisher, Julia Child, James Beard, and the Reinvention of American Taste by Luke Barr. Visit our website's digital resources to explore biography and context and Galileo, Georgia's virtual library. PDF versions of many of James Beard's cookbooks and his memoirs, including Delights and Prejudices, are available in the Galileo database. Thank you for watching.